My first guest is Chris Gray, the founder of Your Empire and the former host of Your Property Empire on the Sky Business Channel. Chris, great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Look, I want to talk to you about the rebound in the housing market, but just quickly explain what your business is in the property sector.
Sure, and I like the term rebound rather than correction, but we can get into that later on.
Okay.
So effectively, I've got a property buyer's agents business. I was an accountant by trade, basically semi-retired out of Deloitte at 31 because I was making so much money from property and tried to salary sacrifice a Ferrari, and they worked out the FBT was more than my wages. They knew I was doing something different. Yeah. So then people said, oh, how do you do it? So I started teaching them, and then they just said, look, do it for me. So effectively, we build property portfolios for people and then buy their homes and investments, but generally from a financial perspective rather than from an emotional one.
Yeah, okay. So therefore, you having an intimate understanding of the various markets around Australia are fairly important to you, because I guess if markets are getting a real clobbering, it's also a buying opportunity for someone like you as well.
Sure. So most of the time I specialise in one thing, as in blue chip. So whatever I do for me, I do for my clients. And so typically I'm buying second-hand, median price, capital city, 5 to 10 Ks from the city, because I reckon that is the most stable thing, just like you'd have blue chip shares. But yes, I do. I understand the regional markets and I understand the brand new markets, and it's more from avoiding it because I see all those volatility and the scary stories.
Okay. Houses and apartments, or just apartments?
So I'm a believer of buy where you're or buy something depending on where you're investing. So in Sydney, I'd always buy a unit because that's what the average person lives in for the average price. Melbourne, probably more a townhouse or a villa. Anywhere else in Australia, a house.
Okay, so you are across all kinds, but you select. Let's just go back to the point you're saying. For example, in Sydney, you go apartments. Why is that?
So typically I'm avoiding the CBD because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building massive towers and not many Aussies want to live in the city. Yeah. So if you go 5 to 15 Ks for the median price, which is roughly $1 million, that gets you a 2-bedroom unit in Coogee, Bondi, Kirribilli, Manly, Fairlight, Balmain, places like that. That's where all the young professionals with high disposable income, that's where they want to live. And so basic economics from your economics school is if there's no supply, lots of demand, no matter what's going on in the market, prices go up.
And are the people who live in these properties, are they tenants or are they owners as well?
So you get a balance of both. So in one of the blocks I own where I bought in 97, so 20 years ago when I first came to Australia, there's been a block of 9, only 2 have sold since then. And so when you've got that short of supply, because there's people that have been in there for 30 or 40 years, they pass it on to their kids. Yeah. When you've got zero supply, prices only go one way.
So in selecting an apartment in an outer area to the CBD, you look at from the point of view of how likely is a council going to permit a whole lot of apartments. Like, for example, in Sydney, around Burwood and Stratford and Homebush, they've gone ballistic. But there are a lot of other suburbs where I presume the councils are very resistant. Is that the sort of place that you target because it maintains the value?
That's the thing. So if you're down at Coogee Beach, you can basically go 3 stories high. You move further out to Randwick or Kensington or something like that, and the further you go out, the more density they want. And so in one building in Coogee, we doubled it from 7 to 14, but that's almost unheard of. And so that's the thing. So even if council said you can build twice the levels, chances are people still aren't going to give up their properties.
Do you do development?
We do tiny bits of development. We call it more major renovations. So that block of 7 we turned into 14. We put 2 penthouses on the roof and a little block in the back garden. But it's really a bonus for buying right by the beach rather than the whole reason for it.
What about, I've noticed that some councils have permitted the top level of old apartment blocks to actually build into the roof. Is that something that you've done in the past and that's successfully added a lot of value to them?
Sure. So we've set up a small fund, probably literally only about 6 months ago, to invest in property options. So in some of the western suburbs in Sydney, like in Parramatta, they've potentially doubled the size of the CBD. And so that's where you could suddenly turn 50 apartments into 300, 400, 500 apartments. So there's plenty of opportunity there. But this is where our clients would invest maybe 1 or 2% of their money, but they'd put the 1995 into blue chip property.
Okay. I know historically you've told me you've bought apartments in Sydney, Melbourne, right around the country, and they're often exclusively great quality
Yeah.
apartments. But there's a whole lot of worries around cladding issues and structural or building issues. Has that really taken away a bit of the demand for apartments in Sydney and Melbourne?
So just like we say there's two different property markets, there's houses and there's units, even when you get to units, there's different types of units. So if you've got a block of 500 units that's brand spanking new, that's completely different to a block of 9 by the beach. And so we're typically just investing in blocks of 12 or smaller, and we leave the bigger stuff to other people.
Okay.
But that is the major downside. So buying off the plan, you've got the risk of not being able to settle, which lots of people couldn't, especially the foreigners. And now we've got all these cladding issues. Whether the cladding issues is something new or it's something just brought around by the media because they can't talk about the property downturn anymore, they've got to talk about something. When the media gets hold of something, it's like a red rag to a bull, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I guess in many ways, the problem around cladding, first up, they're going to really need the owners of these apartment blocks, the developers, are going to need someone to sign off and say there is no cladding problem here. Therefore, buyers could go in confident that there's no cladding issue. The next sign off will be, will the building fall apart? It's a big problem, isn't it?
Well, effectively, it was being signed off, so it was private certifiers that were signing it off. So that's the issue. And so, look, this is something now, it's got so big in the media that the government will have to sort something out. But it's like anything. There's various different schemes over the years to take your builders to court, whether you're doing something in your back garden or you're doing a massive block. And you try and sue anyone for anything, and the lawyers win, and it's a whole
they'll claim
nightmare.
bankruptcy anyway and just reinvent themselves. But I guess what I'm trying to work out is, because of all this publicity, will this, in a sense, keep a lid on the demand, the excessive demand for apartments, and in a sense, contain the house price rebound in Sydney and Melbourne?
So, first of all, just purely for brand new stock, then yes, it potentially will. But there's not much of a market there anyway, because the foreigners still can't invest in Australia because they're struggling to get the lending, and there's higher taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
So again, all of these things, they come and go.
But is there oversupply then of those sorts of apartments in Sydney and Melbourne?
Oh, there is at the moment. But if you then look 10, 20, 30 years at some of the plans, especially in, say, the western suburbs of Sydney with the new airports, then if no one's building now, there'll be a massive undersupply. So again, it's like anything with the markets, it goes up and down and up and down.
Okay, so we've talked about the overall big issues in the market. This rebound, are you surprised how quickly it's come back?
And I love the word rebound. I don't think the press have used that. It's always correction and the rest of it. And I don't believe the word correction because sure, a lot of economists that sell shares say that the property market's overinflated, but if you literally take all the money out of the market, in any market, even if you're in fruit and veg, no one's going to be buying because they've got no money. So sure, prices will come off. I reckon some of the brand new stuff was off 20 or 30%. The good stuff was off 5%, and some stuff was still rising. So it's definitely a different kind of market. But look, it all happened on the same day, literally. So it's the day after the election, and I actually voted for the first time in my life. So I think I was one of the votes that helped. But then we had the interest rate cut. We had the announcement about first home buyers, like a deposit kind of assistance. And I think there was one other thing. So we had 4 or 5 things.
The tax cut was it as well. And so you
5 things in 1 week. It's the
and
happiest
also
week.
there was the lack of the threat that Bill Shorten presented, namely changes to negative gearing and the capital gains discount. So all that.
And I still didn't believe in that.
You left one thing out. Banks also were permitted to lend more.
Yeah. So it's all of those things. But the logic says, even with stuff like the tax cuts, was it's going to be grandfathered to buy in now. But just like we had on Sky and the GFC, we were telling buyers to go and buy now because there's no other buyers in the market. There's lots of supply to go, but people don't think logically. They've got the herd mentality. So it's still going to take a while for them to get in. So people still need to get pre-approved. But confidence is the biggest motivator in the market beyond all the money side of things. People can find the money if they really want it. And so I think this confidence will continue. Most of the media is all positive. We've still got a few of the economists coming saying it's going to drop another 40%, but I think, after a while people just say, oh, whatever. So I think it's really how people wake up on the 1st of January. I think that's going to be the big teller.
Well, the important point to me is that a recession could make house prices fall again. We don't know at what rate. you've worked through at least, were you here in 1990, 91 when the recession was on?
No, so I was in the UK. So I bought my first property in 92, just after we had all the negative gearing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so, but obviously you've analysed Australian markets because you're a buyer for your clients. If we had a reasonably serious recession, and it may well be coming out of a China-US trade deal create a recession, what would you be saying to your clients about the possibilities of what the value of their properties might fall for in a recession?
Sure. So the main thing is buying quality stock, which would be the same in the stock market.
Yep.
So they've only got quality stock, and it was all bought on a conservative valuation.
Yep.
So they know you've got the right thing and the right price, and that's assuming they bought today. Most of them have bought 5 or 10 years ago, so they've already got the equity gains in there. So if we go into a recession, chances are interest rates are going to be even lower. Now is probably the most positive cash flow most people have been. So when I bought in the 90s, we were getting 5% yields, so 500 grand for a $500 a week apartment, but we were paying probably 8% interest rate, so you're dropping 3% gross. Now we're borrowing at 3.5%, we're getting 3.5% rents, so we're dropping 0% gross and maybe 1.5% net. So this is the most positive cash flow time. So unless rents suddenly go from 3.5 to 2, which I very much doubt, the cash flow difference isn't that much. So as long as you're not forced to sell and you can cash flow that property and you can wait 3, 5, 10 years.
Well, when I buy quality shares, I look from the point of view, even if there is going to be a recession, Woolworths will still keep pumping out lots of product to the people who turn up and have to eat every week, and therefore its dividend might fall only a little bit because they're not going to be investing in other things, they'll be paying dividends. And I figure from your point of view, the calibre of your tenant becomes an important part of the profit equation. You get a tenant who could be working in the mining industry, could be good one day but gone the next. Do you actually look at the calibre and the employability of a tenant?
Well, that's exactly why we buy in those areas. So again, I'll bring Bondi Beach just because everyone knows where it is around the world, is they're not in those specific industries and they're 25 to 35. They're always going to have a job. It's us old farts that will be out of work, not the young kids. Yeah. And if they can't afford to pay the rent, they'll go out 5 nights a week rather than 7, or 3 nights a week versus 7. Yeah. So these are people with high disposable incomes. They're sharing flats with a similar kind of people. They've got wealthy parents. They've got cash, which is why we follow them. Whereas that single person, say in Paddington, who's got a partner and 2 kids at private school and expensive BMWs, they're in a property that's worth 2 or 3 million on one income, earning $500,000, and they could lose their job. Yeah. So we go for the 25-year-olds earning, say, 75 to 125 grand each. Yeah. They're a pretty safe bet.
And I guess you, in a sense, you can actually grow with them as well. But I guess if they become owners of places in Paddington with the BMW, the kids, school fees and one income, they no longer can work with you anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, one last thing, and this is guesswork. Do you think that the worst of the house price problems Australia suffered over the last 2 years or so is behind you?
I think most of it is, yes. So I had a conversation with you maybe a year ago. I pulled all of my redraw out of my accounts and I was borrowing it at 5% and I was reinvesting it 2 or 2.5% because I was worried about the banks collapsing or pulling the rug out. I'm now putting that money back off term deposit back into my mortgages because I think the banks are pretty safe and I think they're pretty calm. It's not as if we're looking at 10 or 20% growth again. We're talking a few digits. Yep. So now is safe and calm, in my opinion.
Okay. Your website?
yourempire.com.au.
That's Chris Gray giving us his insights on the property market, and I think he knows a thing or two about it.